Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. That's exactly what happened to me on what seemed like an ordinary Wednesday evening. I had just gotten home from work, my heels clicking against the wooden floor as I walked inside. The day had been long and exhausting, and all I wanted was to soak in a hot bath and let the stress melt away. Little did I know that night would leave an indelible mark on my life, one that would change everything in our household. The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual. My husband, Thomas, had mentioned earlier that he'd be working late to meet an important project deadline. That left only Jason, Thomas's son from a previous marriage. At 20, Jason was reserved but polite, never one to cause trouble. He worked part-time at a local hardware store and spent most of his free time in his room. Though we weren't particularly close, we had a warm, respectful relationship. As I set my bag on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, I noticed Jason's truck in the driveway. Strange. He usually worked the night shift. I called his name, my voice echoing through the empty house. No answer. Assuming he had his headphones on or had already gone to bed, I didn't think much of it. After finishing my water, I headed upstairs to change into something more comfortable. As I passed the bathroom, I heard faint running water and noticed the door was slightly ajar. That struck me as odd. Jason was meticulous about privacy and always kept doors shut tight. Curious, I hesitated before pushing the door open just a fraction more. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Jason stood by the sink, his back to me, shoulders hunched, in deep concentration. His movements were frantic, and I noticed he was shirtless, his jeans hanging loosely from his hips. He clutched a washcloth in his hands, scrubbing at something out of sight. The creak of the door startled him. He spun around, eyes wide with panic. "Oh my God, I didn't hear you come in," he blurted, his voice shaking. I froze, equally startled. My eyes flickered between him and the washcloth in his hands. A rush of embarrassment washed over me. I hadn't meant to intrude. I'm so sorry," I stammered, quickly averting my gaze. I didn't mean to interrupt. I turned to leave, reaching for the doorknob, but his voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, his tone pleading. "It's not what you think." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to pretend this had never happened and walk away. But another part sensed something deeper. His voice wasn't defensive. It was embarrassed, desperate. Against my better judgment, I turned back to face him. "Okay," I said carefully. "Then what's going on?" Jason looked down, his face flushing red. He fidgeted with the washcloth, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "It's just, I didn't know who else to ask." "Ask about what?" I pressed, my curiosity growing. He shifted uncomfortably. "It's personal," he admitted. "I've been dealing with some stuff, and I don't know what to do. Dad's not here, and you're the only other person I can talk to." His vulnerability caught me off guard. Jason had always been independent, never one to open up. The fact that he was turning to me now felt significant. I stepped inside the bathroom, closing the door slightly behind me to give us some privacy. "All right," I said gently. "Tell me what's going on." At first he spoke in vague terms, stumbling over his words. But as I listened, it became clear that this was a sensitive subject, one he was too embarrassed to discuss with his father. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the internal battle between wanting help and fearing judgment. "Jason," I said after a moment, choosing my words carefully. "First of all, I think it's good that you're paying attention to these things. It shows that you care about your health. And secondly, there's no shame in asking questions or seeking advice. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of gratitude and relief. Really? You don't think it's weird? Not at all, I assured him. Everyone has questions about their body. It's completely normal. We spent the next few minutes talking, and I did my best to give him practical, reassuring advice. As awkward as the conversation had started, I could tell it was a huge relief for him to get it off his chest. By the time we finished, he looked visibly calmer. He even managed a small smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "I didn't think I had anyone to talk to about this." I returned his smile. "You always have someone to talk to, Jason. Remember that." As I left the bathroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved to have been there for him. On the other, I wasn't sure how to process the unexpected shift in our relationship. Something had changed. I just didn't know what it meant yet. Over the next few days, things were different. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Thomas was still busy with work. Jason still kept to his routine. But beneath it all, there was an unspoken tension between us. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made me more aware of him. It was a Friday evening when the shift became even more apparent. Thomas was out meeting a client, and I was making dinner when I heard Jason's truck pull into the driveway. I hesitated, knife in hand, wondering how to greet him. "Hey, Jason," I called out casually when he walked in. He gave me a small, tired smile. "Hey." We ate dinner in silence at first, but I noticed he seemed more at ease. Finally, after a while, he put down his fork and looked at me. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he admitted, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "And I wanted to thank you again." For listening, I looked up, surprised by his sincerity. "Of course, Jason. I'm glad I could help." His gaze softened. "You've always been nice to me," he said hesitantly. "And I didn't want you to think I didn't appreciate it." His words caught me off guard. "I know it's not always easy," I said after a moment. "But I'm glad you know you can always talk to me." He nodded, and for the first time in a while, the air between us felt lighter. Later that night, as I sat curled up on the couch, Jason appeared in the doorway. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sat up immediately. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He hesitated before stepping fully into the room. He looked nervous. "I've been thinking. I think I need to tell Dad," he admitted. "I don't know how, but he needs to know what I'm going through." I was taken aback by his words, but in the best way possible. This was a step forward. "That's a big decision, Jason," I said gently. "And I think he'll appreciate your honesty. It's not easy, but it's important." His eyes met mine, gratitude flickering in them. "Thanks for everything," he said before leaving the room. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, I lay in bed next to Thomas, thinking about how much had changed. Life in our household would never be the same again. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing.